imagine there are two giant invisible countdown clocks just kind of hovering over human history.
Right.
Like one is ticking down to this highly specific predetermined head count, and the other one is ticking down to the absolute collapse of global empires.
It's a pretty intense visual, yeah.
It really is. And today, we are looking at what happens when those two clocks hit zero. We've got an incredibly clarifying deep dive today, unpacking the architecture of biblical prophecy.
Which, I mean, can be notoriously complicated if you don't have the right framework.
Oh, absolutely. So specifically, our mission for this deep dive is to map out two massive, intricately connected frameworks from the source material. We're looking at the fullness of the Gentiles and the times of the Gentiles.
And that is such a vital distinction to make for anyone studying this, because when you look at the theological texts, it is incredibly easy to see why these two phrases just get totally mashed together.
Yeah, I mean, they sound almost exactly the same.
Yeah. Exactly. Both of them explicitly deal with the Gentiles, which historically and biblically simply means the non-Jewish nations. And crucially, both of these frameworks hinge on one very specific, very expectant word.
The word until.
Yes, the word until.
Right, because until implies like a waiting period,
Yeah.
a deliberate countdown, a moment where this massive switch is going to flip.
Right. But because the phrases sound so similar, people just blend them into one vague concept.
They really do.
Okay.
Okay, let's unpack this, because mixing these two concepts up is basically like confusing a wedding RSVP list with a political term limit.
Oh, I like that. That's a great way to put it.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, they're two entirely different mechanisms. One is about this exclusive invitation, and the other is about global authority.
That is a brilliant analogy, and it really perfectly sets up our roadmap for today. To understand that difference, we need to start with the phrase that deals with spiritual rescue before we move over to the world systems that those rescued individuals are leaving behind.
Makes sense. So where do we start in the text?
Let's look directly at the biblical text for the first concept, the fullness of the Gentiles. This comes straight from the Apostle Paul.
Okay.
So in Romans chapter 11, verse 25, and I will read from the NASB 1995 translation here, Paul writes, "For I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in."
Until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in.
I actually want to pause right there for a second.
Sure.
Because if you are listening to this and wondering how a loving God could ordain a partial hardening on a nation, we really need to clarify what that actually means.
Right, because it can sound harsh.
Yeah. It sounds like God is just purposely making a group of people stubborn for no reason.
And that is a very common misconception, actually, in this theological framework. A hardening is not some arbitrary punishment. It is a strategic, temporary blinding.
Temporary being the key word there. Exactly. Scholars point out that when Israel as a nation rejected Jesus as the Messiah, a major shift occurred. God temporarily placed a veil over their national understanding. But the why is the beautiful part here.
Right, because it wasn't just spite.
No, not at all. This was done specifically so that the spotlight of grace could swing outward to the rest of the world. It was a shifting of focus to allow the non-Jewish nations, the Gentiles, to step onto the stage of redemption.
So it's not a permanent rejection. It's more like a pause on one program to start another one.
Yes, exactly.
And that brings us to the word fullness, because when I hear fullness, it sounds almost volumetric, like pouring water into a glass until it reaches the absolute brim.
That's a great way to visualize it. In this specific context, fullness represents the completion of a divinely determined number.
A specific number.
Yes, it is a specific head count of Gentiles who will be saved during this era. God has a present work happening right now among the non-Jewish nations, this ingathering of believers, and there is a set, unchangeable integer. Yeah, and when that exact number is reached, the glass is full. That is the fullness.
This is where that RSVP analogy I mentioned earlier really comes to life.
Oh, absolutely. Walk us through that.
So think about a massive, meticulously planned banquet. The host of the banquet, God, in this case, doesn't just leave the doors open indefinitely and just kind of hope people show up.
Right. He's not just winging it.
Exactly. He knows the exact head count. He knows exactly who is coming, how many chairs are set at the tables, how many plates are needed, and the moment that final expected guest walks through the door, the current phase of the evening just ends.
The door's shut.
Yeah, the door's closed.
Yeah.
and the host's attention shifts to the next part of the event.
Well, what's fascinating here is that this concept, God operating with precise completion points and exact numerical targets, is not just an isolated idea Paul throws out in
Oh,
Romans.
it's everywhere in the text.
It really is. It is
Okay.
woven into the very fabric of the biblical narrative. For example, in John chapter 10, verse 16, Christ speaks about gathering his sheep, bringing them into one fold. He speaks of them as a known, specific group. Then, in Acts chapter 15, verse 14, the text describes how God is taking from among the Gentiles a people for his name.
Taking from among,
Yeah, it's an active, deliberate extraction process.
which implies a beginning and an end to that specific extraction. Like, it's not just a vague, endless open-door policy. It's a specific, targeted group being gathered out of the broader population.
Precisely. And perhaps the most vivid, undeniable example of this divine numbering is found in Revelation chapter 6, verse 11.
Oh, the martyrs.
Yes. In that passage, there are martyrs who have been killed for their faith, and they are crying out for justice. But the text says they are told to rest a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed even as they had been would be completed.
Wow. So God isn't just reacting to human history as it unfolds. He is actually waiting for a precise, preordained integer to be met, even down to the exact number of martyrs.
Exactly. The theological framework strongly indicates that God's saving work proceeds toward a very specific, mathematically precise completion point.
So there is a literal specific number. And when that number hits, when that final Gentile guest walks into the banquet, a massive shift happens.
A huge shift.
Because the theological timeline lays out a very clear sequence for this. We start at the event of Pentecost, which essentially fires the starting gun on what theologians call the church age.
Right, the era we're in now.
Yeah. This is the current period of grace where the gospel goes out primarily to the Gentile nations. And this church age keeps running right up until this fullness headcount is reached.
Yeah.
And the event that acts as the finish line. The rapture of the church.
That is the exact marker. The sudden gathering up of all these believers is the concluding event of this specific Gentile ingathering.
Okay.
And when that happens, Paul's equation in Romans 11 reaches its conclusion. The partial hardening of Israel is finally lifted. God's redemptive focus, which had been primarily on gathering the Gentile church, shifts back to Israel as a nation.
Their national restoration begins.
Exactly.
But wait, hold on. Let me challenge that for a second.
Go for it.
If the fullness is reached and the rapture removes the church, does God just shut the door on Gentile salvation entirely? Like, are all other Gentiles who are left behind just completely out of luck?
It's a fair question.
Because if the RSVP list is full and the doors close, it logically sounds like anyone left on the outside is entirely cut off from grace.
And that is the immediate logical assumption anyone would make. But if we dig deeper into the prophetic texts, it becomes very clear that this is not the case at all.
Okay, good.
Yeah, the completion of the fullness of the Gentiles absolutely does not mean that no more Gentiles will be saved. In fact, Scripture explicitly indicates that a massive wave of Gentiles will come to faith after this specific headcount is finished.
Wait, really? So the banquet door isn't deadbolted forever?
Far from it. We have to look at Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 through 17. The Apostle John describes seeing a vast multitude so large that no one could even count it, from every nation, all tribes, peoples, and tongues.
Right, okay.
And the text specifically identifies this group as the ones who come out of the Great Tribulation. This is a crucial detail. These are Gentiles being saved after the fullness has been reached and the rapture has occurred.
Okay, that makes sense. But it raises a huge question.
What's that?
Well, if the church age is over and the primary vehicle for spreading the gospel has been removed, how are these people being evaluated or saved during this brutal tribulation period?
This is where we have to examine Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. This is the famous passage detailing the judgment of the sheep and the goats at the end of the tribulation.
Right.
What's fascinating here is that the nations, the surviving Gentiles, are gathered before Christ, and the metric used to judge them is their response to Christ's brethren.
Christ's brethren, meaning the Jewish people. Specifically, the Jewish people who will be facing intense, unprecedented persecution under the Antichrist's global regime during the tribulation.
Yes, exactly. The text says, the sheep, those who clothed, fed, and sheltered these persecuted brethren inherit eternal life. This proves undeniably that Gentiles are still being saved during this subsequent period.
Okay, I see.
But we have to be incredibly careful here. Theologians emphasize this strongly. This is not salvation by works.
I am so glad you brought that up because honestly, that's exactly what it sounds like.
It really does.
Yeah. If they are being judged by how they treated people, whether they gave them water, visited them in prison, clothed them, it sounds like they earned their salvation through a really dangerous humanitarian aid campaign.
It does sound like that on the surface, which is why understanding the mechanism behind the judgment is so critical. Even after the fullness of the Gentiles is reached, salvation remains strictly by grace through faith. But think about the context of the tribulation. Under the global regime of the Antichrist, aligning with the Jewish people will be a capital offense. It will be treason against the world government.
Ah, I see. So giving a persecuted Jewish person a cup of water or hiding them in your attic isn't just mere charity.
No, not all.
It is a life or death risk.
Precisely. Their treatment of Christ's brethren doesn't earn them salvation. Rather, it is the undeniable outward proof of their inward faith.
It's the evidence.
Right. In a time of unparalleled global deception, risking your life to protect Christ's people proves that your ultimate allegiance is to God, not the global system. Their actions reveal the absolute reality of their faith.
Wow, that completely changes the perspective. It's the ultimate proof of where their loyalty lies.
Exactly.
Okay, so that perfectly covers the fullness of the Gentiles. It is a spiritual headcount. It's about salvation, grace, and an exact RSVP list culminating in the rapture. But now we have to look at that second clock. If the fullness tells us how God rescues individuals out of the world, how does he deal with the world systems they're leaving behind?
And that brings us to our second concept.
Right. We are moving from spiritual salvation entirely over to earthly geopolitics.
We are. And we are shifting from the theological writings of Paul in Romans to the prophetic words of Jesus himself in the Gospel of Luke.
Let's hear it.
Let me read Luke chapter 21, verse 24, again from the NASB 1995. Jesus says, "And they will fall by the edge of the sword, and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled."
There's that expectant word again. Until.
Yep, until.
Until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So how do biblical scholars define this specific timeline?
The times of the Gentiles refers to a very specific, prolonged period in history during which Gentile nations exercise continuous political domination over Israel, and specifically over the city of Jerusalem. So where the fullness was about God's redemptive work saving Gentiles, the times is about Gentile empires ruling over God's city.
Geopolitical domination. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was looking through the historical records on the timeline for this, and the sources state that this period of Gentile domination started in the year 609 BC.
Correct.
But wait, wasn't Jerusalem actually destroyed much later? In 586 BC, when King Nebuchadnezzar burned the temple? Why does the prophetic clock start decades early? That feels like a glaring historical discrepancy.
It's a fantastic question, and resolving it speaks to exactly what Jesus meant by the phrase trampled underfoot.
Okay, unpack that.
When we analyze the historical record, it becomes clear that this trampling isn't primarily about the physical destruction of masonry or the burning of buildings. It is about the loss of political sovereignty. It is about legal subjugation.
So losing their independence as a free nation.
Exactly. Let's look at the geopolitical vacuum of the ancient Near East in 609 BC. The Assyrian Empire, which had been the dominant superpower, collapsed. A massive power struggle ensued, and Babylon emerged as the new dominant imperial authority in the region.
Right.
In that exact year, 609 BC, the last righteous king of Judah, Josiah, was killed in battle. From that moment onward, Israel ceased to exist as a fully independent, sovereign political power.
It became a vassal state.
Yes, they came entirely under the thumb of successive Gentile empires. They had to pay tribute, their kings were appointed or deposed by foreign rulers, and they lost their autonomy.
Oh, wow.
The loss of sovereignty began in 609 BC, decades before the walls of Jerusalem were physically breached and burned in 586 BC.
That makes total sense. The crown had already been taken and handed to a foreign power, even if the castle hadn't been burned down yet.
That's a great way to put it.
God's prophetic clock tracks true authority, not just the physical real estate. And the texts trace this political subjugation through a very specific prophetic framework, right? The book of Daniel.
They do. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the book of Daniel lays out the course of human history from that exact moment in 609 BC forward.
Right.
It describes an unbroken succession of Gentile kingdoms that will dominate the globe and subjugate Israel. It starts exactly where we just were, the Babylonian Empire.
I like to think of Daniel's framework like a series of hostile corporate takeovers.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like the overarching monopoly stays in place, but the management just keeps changing.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. The subjugation of the subsidiary Israel remains constant, even as the global superpower shifts.
Right.
From Babylon, the geopolitical dominance transfers to the Medo-Persian Empire. From Medo-Persia, it is conquered by Greece under Alexander the Great. From Greece, it transitions to the iron grip of Rome. And then prophetically, the texts point to a final, future global system, the kingdom of the Antichrist.
So for this entire massive stretch of human history, from 609 BC, rolling through the ancient empires all the way through to today and extending into the future, Jerusalem is caught in this continuous cycle of being subjugated, occupied, or politically pressured by non-Jewish Gentile world powers.
Yes.
And that unbroken era is the times of the Gentiles.
Correct. It is the designated duration of Gentile political rule over world history.
So what does this all mean? We have explored these two massive concepts, and really what we are looking at are two different clocks running simultaneously in human history.
Exactly.
One is a spiritual stopwatch tracking a headcount. The other is a political stopwatch tracking empires.
How do their finish lines compare?
Well, this raises an essential question about how the biblical narrative views the culmination of human history, because these two clocks do not end at the same time.
They don't.
No, they end at two completely different distinct events. The first clock, the fullness of the Gentiles, ends with the rapture. It is the sudden, glorious completion of a redemptive work.
The bride is gathered, the exact number is met, and the church age concludes.
Right. The RSVP list is full, the banquet doors close, and the rescue operation for that specific era is complete.
Yes. But the second clock, the times of the Gentiles, keeps ticking a little longer through that terrible tribulation period we discussed earlier.
Right. The geopolitical clock.
Exactly. That geopolitical clock does not end until the second coming of Christ. It ends when the Messiah physically, visibly returns to earth, destroys the final Gentile world power, terminates Gentile political domination over Israel once and for all, and establishes his own Messianic Kingdom.
And just to be clear for the listener, when theologians talk about the Messianic Kingdom, they aren't talking about, like, people floating on clouds playing harps.
No, not at all.
They are talking about a literal, physical, geopolitical reality where Christ rules from a restored Jerusalem, right?
Absolutely. It is the total reversal of the power dynamic that started in 609 BC.
Wow.
The times of Gentile global domination are replaced by the ultimate sovereign rule of the Messiah on earth.
Man, when you put them side by side like that, it clears up so much confusion. You synthesize this beautifully when you realize that one is about the salvation of souls and the other is about the sovereignty of nations.
That is the perfect summary. The fullness of the Gentiles concerns the completion of God's saving purpose among the Gentiles, culminating in the removal of Israel's temporary hardening.
Right.
The times of the Gentiles concerns the period of Gentile political domination over Israel, beginning all the way back in 609 BC with the rise of Babylon, and ending with the visible, physical return of Christ to rule the nations.
You know, it is just incredible to think about the absolute precision of all this. It's not just random historical events crashing into each other.
No, it's highly orchestrated.
If you are listening to this, why should you care about the difference between a spiritual head count and a political timeline? Why does getting these two phrases right matter for you?
It's the ultimate question.
Well, first of all, it prevents massive confusion when you're reading biblical prophecy. It stops you from blending distinct events together. But more importantly, it unlocks a clear view of a highly organized, dual-layered divine plan.
Absolutely.
God isn't just operating in the spiritual realm, saving individual souls and building a church. He is simultaneously orchestrating the geopolitical rise and fall of empires, steering the entirety of human history toward a definitive physical conclusion.
It reminds us that absolutely nothing is out of control.
Yeah.
The very fact that the texts claim God knows the exact number of the fullness and has preordained the exact duration of the times means that both grace and global governance are entirely measured and accounted for.
Absolutely. Which leaves us with something pretty profound to think about.
Definitely.
Since these two timelines, the redemptive clock of individual salvation and the political clock of global empires, are running simultaneously right now in our modern world, how does recognizing both change the way you read tomorrow morning's geopolitical news headlines versus how you view your own spiritual journey?
A phenomenal question to reflect on as we wrap up.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it brought some clarity, some insight, and maybe a little awe at how intricately these prophetic systems are designed. Keep studying the texts, keep asking the hard questions, and we will catch you on the next deep dive. Take care.